I have no problem with the medical use of cannabis, just as I have no problem with the medical use of opiates. If a drug is needed for a valid medicinal purpose, though, and is being administered safely, there should be no question of its legality. And if a drug that's proven to be safe abroad is needed here, it should be available. I agree that the regulation of medicines is a thicket of complexity, bureaucracy, and corporate and institutional self-interest. My basic contention is that something that's been found to be safe in a reliable jurisdiction shouldn't need to be tested again here.
Marijuana is a gateway drug. The risk of graduating to ice or to heroin from extended marijuana use is real and documented. This action by the Greens risks the health of Australians. It should be rejected and they should withdraw it, and we will oppose it.
Herb. Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything. Why these people who want to do so much good for everyone, who call themselves governments and this and that, why them say you must not use the herb? Because it make you rebel. Against what?
Excuse me while I light my splay. Oh God, I got to take a leave from reality. I just can't dream. As a wild staying with this way.
Hello, today is the 6th of November 2018 and you're listening to the Australian Cannabis Review podcast. Well, thanks for joining me today, and when I hear myself say that, geez, the year's really flown by. I guess it's like every other year, but November, wow, that's come across quickly. But anyway, back to the podcast. For all those that are new, thanks for joining. What we plan to do here on the Australian Cannabis Review is talk about all things cannabis. There's a focus mainly on Australia, but also North America as well, as you know, that's been a pretty important space. I mean, if you look at states in America, if you look at Canada, they're the first country to legalize cannabis just under 3 weeks ago now, on the 17th of October. I feel that's kind of important to look into that sphere as well. But for this month, I kind of got a special kind of theme, and that's going to be talking about Australian cannabis stocks. Now, the reason why am I talking about stocks on a cannabis podcast? Well, pretty much because all the major players in the cannabis sphere in the world right now are publicly listed companies. And some of them have got huge market caps. If you look at the kind of top three, we're looking at here a company called Tilray, based out of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, so that's in Canada. They're listed on the NASDAQ, and then we got Canopy Growth Corporation, the second largest company, and Aora, who are the third largest company. And all three of those companies have market caps of close to around the $10 billion mark. So they're quite big. And I don't know if I want to say rightly so, but they're definitely the leaders in the space at the moment. So I want to talk about what's going on in Australia. And I think if I mentioned market cap, I don't think there's a better place to start than number one on the list. And that is a company called Cann Group Limited. So that's who I'm going to be talking about today. Now, the cannabis market in Australia is relatively new. I mean, most companies have been around in this space for the last couple of years, some a little bit longer. But since the government changed its legislation regarding, manufacture of medicinal cannabis, a lot more companies have propped up, or they've been a bit more aggressive in how they're approaching the sector, because the government's created a framework where now they can legally work around producing cannabis, or medicinal cannabis, as the case is in Australia. So let's start off here. We got Cann Group Limited. Their ASX ticker code is CAN. Currently, the company's trading at $2.66 per share. They have a market cap of $383.89 million as of today. And if we look at the high-low range over the last 52 weeks, their low over that period was $1.92 per share, and they reached a high of $4.55 per share, and that was actually a little bit after the day that the government announced that Australian companies could now export medicinal cannabis. However, that doesn't really refer to the flower, but it refers to other derivatives of the plant. However, it really created a furor among the investment community. So, Cann Group, what are they all about? Well, they're listed on the Australian Stock Exchange on the 4th of May 2017. So they're just a little bit over a year and a half old as far as being a public listed company. Now, before they listed, they issued a prospectus. So a prospectus is information surrounding a company that the company gives out to the general public in hope that they will invest in the company. And even in the prospectus, it was announced on the first few pages that Aora, who, as I mentioned before, they are the third largest cannabis company in the world, had already agreed to an investment of $6.5 million, which was equivalent to a 19.9% share of the company. So already from the get-go, Cann Group had really, really good backing by one of the top companies. And at that point in time, Aora was the second largest company. So I guess investors really thought that this company was probably going to go places, and they only listed at a share price of 30 cents per share. And as you may have heard before, right now they're trading at $2.66 per share. So if those people that got into the IPO, they've already made a really, really good return on investment. And as you probably know, right now, the medicinal cannabis sector in Australia is mainly driven by, at least what gets the prices spiked or rise in value, is usually announcement from the government, announcing changes in legislation. So as it was in early January of this year, where they allowed exports, that really, sent the share price rocketing. But enough talk about the share price and all that. We want to know, what is Cann Group really all about? Well, firstly, they were the first company to be listed, to be issued medicinal cannabis licenses in Australia from the Office of Drug Control, or the ODC. Now, that already, before they were even listed on the stock exchange, they had these licenses, or at least a couple of them, not all of them, but they did come a short time later anyway. But what is Cann Group all about? Well, basically, Cann Group is focused on building a world-class Australian-based medicinal cannabis company. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, firstly, the cannabis space in Australia, it's a rapidly developing market. It's got huge growth potential. As of a few years ago, the government created a regulatory pathway. So now it's kind of been defined for the company. So now they have a kind of a clear focus on where they want to head. And AusCann, they want to focus on research and development, establish programs, have growing facilities. They want to also look at genetic strains, provide the best kind of medicinal cannabis products for their clients. They're looking at all kinds of genetics. They're, looking at different strains, trying to find out what strains suit certain people and certain patients. Because cannabis is a very complex plant. I know the general kind of feeling is, marijuana is just marijuana, but there are literally thousands of different strains. And they vary greatly. Some have high THC content, some have high CBD contents, and low of both those kinds as well. So I guess Cann Group is using their scientists to figure out, what is the best for each of their people. So the other thing with the medicinal cannabis sector in Australia as well is that there's not just, companies focusing on growing. So a company like Cann Group is focused on growing. They're also focusing on the research of genetics. There's also other medicinal cannabis companies in Australia that, are looking in the beauty sector or the pharmaceuticals. So helping people in that space. You've got companies looking to produce medicines derived from cannabis. So where they can use those cannabis products to, help treat different ailments. You've got companies that just pretty much investors in the space. So even though these companies are publicly listed, they're actually investing in private companies and putting seed money into them or putting capital into those companies, and then hoping that they will get a return on their investments from that. And then there's also companies that are investing or in the space of growing cannabis. But I mean by growing, by producing equipment that grow cannabis. So Cann Group kind of sit in the space of, they're doing their research. They've got agreements with various organizations. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more further as well. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a timeline of, the history of Cann Group over the last 18 months. So starting back in early 2017, Cann Group, before they were even listed, had medicinal cannabis research licenses approved and a medicinal cannabis license approved from the ODC. On the 4th of May 2017, Cann Group listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. As I mentioned, they listed their shares, or offered their shares at 30 cents per share. On opening day, those shares were in the 60 cents range. So already on opening, the share price rose quite a bit. So there was already heaps of interest in that space for Cann Group. On the 30th of May 2017, Cann Group then secured further permits to start cultivation activities. In July, Cann Group signed an executive technical services agreement with Aora. So this agreement was pretty much an agreement that facilitates an exchange of information and support across areas including cultivation and processing of medicinal cannabis, extraction and manufacturing technology, and analysis of cannabis extracts. So this was really, a really important agreement that would help Cann Group, because that's kind of their primary focus, right? They want to produce cannabis, they want to cultivate it, and they want to extract it and manufacture it and provide it for those medical purposes. So this was exactly what Aora needed. Then the following month in August, some major news came across that they had signed a licensing and distribution agreement with Cann Corp for cannabis vaporization technology. So this is working with a company called Cann Corp and dealing with their vaporization systems. So, as people want to look into healthy options for consuming cannabis rather than just, say, smoking a joint, people, they can take cannabis, through a pill, a nasal form. There's different ways that you can ingest the substance. However, another popular form is people that still want to smoke is a vaporization system, because it's a lot less harmful in the lungs. Then a little bit later in August, they also completed their first harvest in their facility in Victoria. Then in October, the OCT granted some more licenses for Cann Group, where they got an import and export license of cannabis genetics and medicinal cannabis products. So being a company that is a holder of this license, they can now apply for a permit to extract raw cannabis materials and cannabis oils for analytical testing. And they also mentioned that announcement that they're still working with Aora Cannabis and a company called Anandia Laboratories overseas. Then it came across the end of November, and this was really, really great news for Cann Group, because they decided to do a capital raising. Their share price had risen from a low in that month of $1.74 and hit a high of $3.75. So it's pretty much doubled in price in that month. But they raised a whopping $60 million at $2.50 per share. Now, $50 million of that raise was done through institutional investors, and a further $10 million was through a share purchase plan, which was given to generic mum and dad investors. And during that capital raise, also, Aora raised their stake from 19.9% of the company to 22.9% of the company. So just kind of solidifying, their belief in the company and their support for them. Then in the new year, in January 2018, the federal government announced medicinal cannabis exports. So this is around the time when the share price hit a high of $4.55. In the period of that month, the share price was at a low range of $2.76. So, as I mentioned before, it kind of goes to show that, if government announcements can really drive a rapid increase in the price of medicinal cannabis stocks in Australia, because it's such a new industry, and, news like this is pretty much the main driver. However, if a company, does something pretty awesome, like signs a deal or, gets an affiliation with somebody, kind of like Aora has done, as well as some other companies, creates a kind of de-risking in the company because someone else that's known in the space is putting a lot of money into it. So if they believe in the company, then it should be worth a lot more. Now, this just always doesn't happen with stocks, but, it's a common kind of theme of what happens. Same thing that happened with Canopy Growth Corporation when Constellation Brands decided to invest, I think it was $5 billion. I think it was $5 billion US dollars into Canopy Growth Corporation, and they paid a premium of like 30-something%, where the share price was worth like somewhere in the 30s, $35, something like that, and they were actually paying $48 a share. So a few weeks after that, the Canopy Growth share price rose dramatically after that. But moving on, in February, Cann Group was granted a new research and medicinal cannabis license, and these two licenses were for the cultivation and production of cannabis for research and medicinal purposes. So the new licenses were secured because they were required to apply to the ODC due to the expiry of the licenses which they had previously, but due to the requirements of that, they have to kind of reissue or reapply for the license. And the license relates to cultivation and product for supply for therapeutic purposes. And also the company at this point in time also announced that they're moving close to a construction of a planned 16,000 square metre Phase 3 facility. And this facility aims to be pretty revolutionary. They're using a company called Aora License Projects, which is, they work in conjunction with the Aora, the listed company, and Aora License is a specialist greenhouse engineering consultancy company. And what they're going to do, they're going to provide technical consultancies to the manufacturer of this greenhouse. It's going to be high tech, it's going to be automated, it's going to be environmentally controlled. So this company is going to be working directly with Cann Group, and they're going to build a state-of-the-art grow house pretty much. And later on in the year, just recently, they announced that that facility is going to grow about 40 to 50 tons of medicinal cannabis. Now, that cannabis could be based for the Australian market. When I looked at some numbers last year, they said that the Australian market over the next year or two only needs about 8 tons of medicinal cannabis to meet supply. So if they're growing 40 to 50 tons, they're going to be growing a whole lot. Hopefully what we're expecting is the uptake of medicinal cannabis for patients around Australia, but also something which could be possibly in the pipeline is that the government announces that it will allow companies to export cannabis. And as we know, as I mentioned before, cannabis is legal in Canada, it's also legal in Uruguay. There's a whole lot of countries around the world right now, many countries in South America, many countries in Europe who have legalized medicinal cannabis. So these are all potential markets for Cann Group. Now, in June, there was a huge announcement for Cann Group where they signed an agreement with Australian Pacific Airports for lease and build of its Stage 3 production facility. And as I mentioned before, that was going to be like 16,000 square meters. That was upgraded now to 37,000 meters squared. So that's over double the size of what they had initially planned. And that whole project is going to cost around $100 million. So it's a huge, huge project. but it's going to create a lot of revenue for Cann Group. And how they're going to fund that, it's going to be through some debt as well as equity, because I think they believe that they may take on some debt to fund it, because they know that, if they're going to be producing 40 to 50 tons of medicinal cannabis, and if they can meet that supply, then they're probably going to be making some good money off that. If they're growing that every year, well, they could be making more money, and who knows, they could then have money to maybe build another grow house and more. So that's all really, really good potential for this company. And at current, they've got a bank balance of about $76 million. So, they're not far off actually having $100 million to pay for that. Although, they are also looking into the research stage as well. They've got, research and development agreements with La Trobe University. They're working with the CSIRO on a research and development agreement as well as signing a research agreement with Victoria, or with Agriculture Victoria, so where they'll undertake further medicinal cannabis research. So Cann Group is really broadening their horizons here. They've got, many research partners. They've got really good backing from Aora. They're going to build a massive facility that's going to support people. They've got a lot of money in the bank. I just really think that their whole business plan and focus is really, really sound at the moment. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm banging the drum here, but research and development, okay? A big check on that. They've got the companies they're working with. They're developing what they say are next generation strains to help a number of different patients. If you look at their cultivation and production activities, well, they've got this $100 million facility underway. They aim to have that in production construction by Q1 2019. They plan to have it in commission by the end of 2019. And they think they'll have it working at full capacity in Q3 2020. Now, this is what they're saying now, so that could either be brought forward or sent back. They've got their manufacturing down well, because now they're allowed to, extract their cannabis and allow it for analysis. And then also the final step, which is the packaging and distribution. So they've signed up to a thing, what's called the Active Medicinal Cannabis Medicines Portal. They've got a license for a vaporizer, and they've really got a high volume export capability. So this pretty much shows that they've got ability to have the whole supply chain covered, from the beginning to the end user. That's what makes Cann Group a really, really good investment, I think, at this point in time. It's because at $2.66 per share, that's only a couple percent up from their capital raising price last year of $2.50 per share. And I think if everything goes to plan, which I believe it should, they've got money in the bank. Who knows? Any day the government could change some kind of legislation which could, cause the share price to go up rapidly. So I think, as it being the largest company by market cap on the Australian Stock Exchange, I think it really deserves that ranking, because they've definitely got high potential and probability that they will do well. Backing from the number 3 company, Aora, good research and development, partnerships. Yeah, Cann Group gets a tick from me. And if you're an investor and you're looking to hold, well, who knows, the share price can go down. I mean, another way to look at it though, and if you're looking at from kind of the Warren Buffett school of investment, well, they're making any money? Well, no, not really. I mean, they only had $2,000 of receipts this quarter. So, yeah, maybe the price doesn't reflect the value, but this is a new and emerging industry, and who knows what your kind of trading purpose is. I like to look for shares personally that are kind of upcoming emerging industries. I only put a small percentage of my money into these kinds of shares because they are higher risk. There have been companies that have been around for years just look at any of the bank stocks, or you got some of the mining stocks. These companies, they're getting solid returns year on year. The price isn't fluctuating much, but then again, you might not get a big return on your investment. But as per Cann Group here, they're in an emerging industry, and from the get-go, they've had a lot of success. They've come really, really far. I think the prices, I don't know, it could be too much, could be too little, but that's up to you really to decide. But fundamentally, as a company in the sphere of cannabis, they're in the right direction. They've got the backing, they've got the finance at the moment, they've got all their bases covered. Just up to you to figure out if you think that the price is worthwhile or not. But that's my overall analysis of Cann Group. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've found it worthwhile. It is a really interesting company. I think this whole space in general is really exciting. I really hope that what's happening in Canada in last month, I hope that kind of sends the ball rolling into other markets. We've got medicinal cannabis going fine. It looks like all around the world people are looking into it, like I mentioned before as well. Europe, South America, even some Asian countries are looking into it, and they've got really strict laws regarding cannabis. So even they're thinking about maybe opening up their laws for medicinal cannabis, because it's just a huge potential market. And if you look at the stats, many people have tried cannabis, and people have been taking it for thousands of years, using it as a medicine. So it's great that we've stepped out of this period of ultimate prohibition and taking a step in the right direction. Just time will tell, how it all works out and when it happens. So yeah, I'm happy to be part of this and looking into it, and thanks for listening for this week. We'll be back again sometime in the next week, I hope, and I'll be looking at some of the other cannabis stocks in the space as well. So the first few weeks will be some interesting stocks, I reckon. Some of the ones that you're better off purchasing rather than some of the others that are out there. Kind of towards the end of the month, I'll look at some of the smaller cap stocks. That's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to go from the highest cap to the lowest cap. The last kind of episode might be just a group of all the smaller cap stocks and just giving a rough analysis of them and what they're actually doing. And you never know, some of them might turn into something one day. It's good to know. It's good to do research, but I hope you've got some information from me. If you want to find out more, go to cannabisontheasx.com. So we've got a website there. Pretty much got all the major points of information, so you can read through all the releases. If you don't want to go on my site, just type in the company name or the ASX ticker code and look up what they've got on the ASX, or go to their website. They're probably the three best places to start. There's many websites online as well. So yeah, have a look for yourself. But in the meantime, I've hoped you've enjoyed the podcast, and I hope to catch you again next time on the Australian Cannabis Review podcast. Bye-bye.